Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Ms. Shashwati Shah. I am an assistant professor in the Department of English, Sikkim University. Today we are going to talk about Indian poetics and the name of the module is Abhinavagupta, Abhinavabharati. The content of the module has been written by me. The objective of this module is learning about the 11th century philosopher Abhinavagupta and his contribution to Indian poetics. We will learn how he has helped in understanding Bharat's Natya Shastra and how the subsequent philosophers have relied on him in understanding and comprehending Bharat's theory. We will also see how he has extended the Rasa that has been written by Bharata and has included another rasa, the 9th rasa, in the list. We'll also see how the Dhanikara theorists had talked about the concept of guna and riti. And last but not the least, we'll see that how Abhinavagupta has placed the readers at the center of the aesthetic experience. He has given most importance to the reader or the spectator and has shown the aesthetic fulfillment happens only in the heart of the recipient. We'll begin the module. Now, who is Abhinavagupta? Abhinavagupta was a philosopher, intellectual and a spiritual leader of Kashmir Saivism from 950 to 1020 AD. He has largely contributed to Indian poetics through his two remarkable commentaries on Bharata called Abhinavabharati and on Anandavardhana called Kavya Loka Lochana, popularly known as Lochana. P.V. Kane remarks about Abhinavagupta that he was one of the most remarkable personalities of medieval India. He was a man of acute intellect and was an encyclopedic scholar. In his eager search for knowledge, Abhinavagupta states that he had resorted to teachers of Tarka, Nyaya and Vaisheshika system and of Buddha and Vaishnava doctrines. Abhinava was a proficient in yogic practices. He believed that he had realized the highest reality, which is Shiva. His work, Abhinavabharati, as is mentioned in the 4th introductory verse, has been inspired by his teacher Bhatta Tota, about whom nothing as much is known except from the fact that he was Abhinavagupta's teacher of dramaturgy. Abhinavagupta has mentioned clearly that he follows the tradition that has been handed down to him by his guru Tota. His work is an elaborate commentary on Natya Shastra, which has influenced almost all the subsequent scholars on this subject except Mammata. Abhinavagupta introduces a new style of writing, combining the qualities necessary for a commentary writing with a high degree of originality expected of a theoretical treatise. The variety of works written and commented upon by Abhinavagupta proves his erudition, mastery of language, skill of interpretation and the encyclopedic knowledge that he possessed both as a critic and a gifted writer himself. Abhinavagupta attempts an interpretation of Bharata's text at multiple levels: conceptual, structural and technical. He has commented on almost all aspects of Bharata's text. J. Tilakasiri, in his article titled Abhinavagupta, the literary critic and commentator and assessment, states that Abhinavagupta occupies a unique position in the history of poetics, for besides furnishing a very illuminating commentary to the Natya Shastra called Abhinavabharati, where he attempts to define the aesthetic experience, he has helped us to understand the scope and significance of the Dhwani theory by his systematic elucidation of the concepts that form the basis for its formulation. Thus, his work can also be treated as an independent treatise on Indian poetry, aesthetics and art. Why is Abhinavabharati so important? Bharata's Natya Shastra is a seminal work on Indian aesthetics, which talks about the experience and pleasure one derives from a work of art by tasting the rasa. Rasa, loosely translated as a juice or flavor, is tasted by the spectator, and it is the experience of tasting that pervades and or enchants him so much so that he gets immersed in it, excluded from all others. Bharata talks about this essence of rasa in all traditional literature, theatre, and other form of arts in India. Rasa is the mood, sentiment, or emotional tone that needs to be relished by the spectator. It is an act of savoring or tasting an experience of art and is associated with the concept of asvadayatva. Natya Shastra spread to different regions of the country, as a result of which it accumulated a lot of regional tone to it. A lot of regional variations crept in, and a number of manuscripts of Natya Shastra became available, which were not the original Natya Shastra per se, but an approximation of the original. However, Abhinavagupta's commentary predates all the known manuscripts of Natya Shastra, and therefore the text he followed and commented upon gained a sort of benchmark status. Abhinavabharati is the oldest available commentary on Bharata's Natya Shastra, since all other commentaries preceding him do not exist. In fact, the commentaries existing prior to Abhinavagupta's work has been known from Abhinavabharati itself, which means that there were commentators who were writing about Bharat's Natya Shastra before Abhinavagupta, but nobody knew about them because they were lost. It is only from the reference that Abhinavagupta makes in his text that we come to know about the fact that there were commentaries on Natya Shastra prior to Abhinavagupta. Abhinavabharati tells us that before Abhinavagupta wrote his work, there were commentaries on Natya Shastra by Bhatta Lolata, Sri Shankuka, Bhatta Nayaka, and his own guru Bhatta Tota. Abhinavagupta presented the view of his predecessors and then went on to improve upon them as well as Bharat's concept in the light of his own school, Kashmiri Saivism. Abhinavagupta's major contribution to Natya Shastra is the inclusion of the ninth rasa. Abhinavagupta opened up a whole new debate on Bharat's theory of rasa with his commentary. According to Bharata, the principal human feelings are 8. They are delight, laughter, sorrow, anger, energy, fear, disgust, heroism, and astonishment. This corresponds to 8 rasas, which are erotic, comic, pathetic, furious, heroic, terrible, odious, and marvelous. One of the most significant contributions made by Abhinavagupta to the concept of rasa is that he extended the 8 rasas categorized by Bharata by adding one more to the list, the Shanta rasa. He argues the 8 rasas are like 8 gods and the Shanta is like the highest center, Shiva. Abhinava regarded Santa rasa, which is peace and tranquility, as not merely an additional rasa, but that one attribute that permeates all else and into which everything else moves to reside. He explained that Shanta rasa underlies all other mundane rasas as their common denominator. All the other rasas emanate from the Shanta rasa and resolves into it. Shanta rasa is a state where the mind is at rest, in a state of tranquility. The other rasas are more transitory in character than the Santa rasa. It is after Abhinavagupta that all other critics have spoken about 9 rasas. Now, The concept of the realization of rasas. Abhinavagupta states clearly that there should be a complete identity of aesthetic experience between the hero, who is the nayak, the poet, who is the kavi, and the audience or the shrotre. This is a central thesis of Abhinavagupta that he uses to interpret the rasa theory and substantiate his argument. He also stresses on the harmonious agreement between the feelings and emotions of the poet on the one hand and the reader on the other. The process of appreciation is based on the concept of sympathetic identification with the character and situations described in the literary works. It is only when that there is a flow of emotions in the mind of the poet that it flows to the mind of the reader. J. Tilakasari points out that Abhinavagupta, and I quote, attempts to explain the manner in which the series of emotions and feelings experienced by the poet are inferred in other and by the operation of the latent impressions reach a state of attunement. He also emphatically states that the aesthetic experience is not in the nature or recollection brought about by the Vibhavas, just as the recollection of firewood arises from the knowledge of smoke, and that it is not something neutral but a sensibility arising from the harmony of feelings produced in the heart. Therefore, rasa is something revealed or brought out by a process of realization. Abhinavagupta's concept of Sthayibhavas. For Bharat, rasa is the origin and ultimate aim of the work of art. Rasa is the state which is evoked by the combined effect of Vibhav, which is literally translated as determinant, Anubhav, translated as the ensuance, and Vyavichari Bhav, translated as transitory moods, which determines the functioning of the mind of the recipient. The emotions that exist in human society in an unmanifested state are excited while reading or watching a work of art by a combined effect of Vibhav, Anubhav and Vyavichari Bhav, and this is known as Rasa. Abhinavagupta points out that all minds, especially those that are trained to be poets and critics, are endowed with certain subtle and latent impressions that are implanted in the mind since birth. They are called Sthayibhavas. In a work of poetry or play, the Vibhavas and the Anubhavas first indicate to the readers or spectators the mental condition of the character, which are then understood by the readers and the spectators in a general way. The Vibhavas and Anubhavas then call the Sthayibhavas in the mind of the readers to play. The minds that are already concentrating on the work of art because of the skill of the poet gets more concentrated on the awakened Sthayibhavas and derive extreme pleasure. It is then that the readers become the Sahrdaya of the poet. Abhinavagupta explains this in a very uncomplicated way. He suggests that in every human mind there are 9 Sthayibhavas or dormant emotions, namely Rati or love for good things, Hasya or laughter, Shoka or grief, Krodh or anger, Bhay or fear, energetic enthusiasm or Utsaha, Jugupsha or disgust, and Sham, which is renunciation. Some of these are dominant in some people, while in others they are less powerful. What Abhinavagupta means actually is that the Sthayibhav is already there in our mind. It just gets excited when we come across certain situations. They come into play through the Vibhavas, Anubhavas and Vyabhichari Bhavs, and that is when the spectator or the reader is able to derive the rasa. It is when men and women in actual life find themselves in situations capable of rousing these latent instincts in them, the instincts are aroused and then developed and manifested by the proper circumstances. When such circumstances are withdrawn, the instincts get back to their dormant conditions, fit of course to be rekindled again. These latent instincts are impressions that aesthetic pleasure or Rasa realization takes its origin. Next comes the concept of Sahrdaya, which is, according to Abhinavagupta, the center for or the center of aesthetic appreciation. But all individuals do not enjoy a piece of poetry or a dramatic piece equally, although each one of them have the latent instinctive capacity of enjoying it. According to Abhinavagupta, all instincts are not of similar strength in an individual. Moreover, every reader or spectator requires some special qualifications to bring into play his or her latent capacity to enjoy aesthetic pleasure. It is then that he or she becomes a regular adhikari, that is, accustomed in the world to observing phenomenon evoking love or anger or valor, that is, having an appreciative experience of life. He is able to appreciate life ideally represented in literature and on the boards. He is called by Abhinavagupta a Sahrdaya. This Sahrdaya must have a poetic heart which is attuned to appreciate work of art, and this attunement is the result of a certain kind of discipline involving constant study and appreciation of literature. Now, as you can understand the word Sahrdaya, Sa means same and Hridaya means heart. Sahrdaya would be a person who has the same heart or the same kind of understanding as that of the poet. Until and unless he has the same sort of feelings as the poet, he will not be able to derive the pleasure out of a work of art which has been written by the poet. Because of his intellectual power and because of the excellence of the actors and the work of art, the Sahrdaya comes to see the person before him not as any particular individual or the relation, not as a relationship between two individuals, but as men and women capable of giving rise to particular emotion in the abstract with which they can now relate. To enjoy the exclusive aesthetic pleasure, the Sahrdaya will also have to exclude his own individuality, otherwise his personal relations and predicament can become obstacles, thus preventing him from deriving ultimate pleasure. So, a Sahrdaya has to keep all his personal loss, personal grief, personal happiness and personal relations aside so as to experience the Rasa and to derive maximum pleasure out of a work of art. Abhinavagupta calls the function of the Bibhavs, Bibhavna, Anubhavs, Anubhavna and Vyavichari Bhavs, Sampura Jnana. Bibhavna's role is to bring the germ to the status of a sprout. Anubhavna initiates the process of making a thing fit to be experienced and enjoyed. And the last is said to mean the process of making a thing fully visible. It is through this gradual process that the dormant mental conditions are aroused and made fully visible and finally enjoyed as Rasa. So Rasa, as you can see, happens as a result of a process. It has to be developed through Bibhavna, Anubhavna and Vyavichari Bhavas. But the Sahrdaya does not realize this evoked mental condition as his own mental condition. This perception of things in abstract is extremely necessary for Abhinavagupta, otherwise the dormant mental conditions will never be evoked. The emotions depicted in the piece of art becomes generalized to the extent that it becomes an universal aspect free from all the barriers of time, space and individuality and realize the highest stage of emotions which is always pleasurable. In case the Sahrdaya understands them to be someone else's emotions, then he will immediately remove himself from the situation and will not be able to experience the Rasa. The significant features of Abhinavagupta's theory of Rasa realization are: every Sahrdaya possesses some latent impressions in his mind fit to be roused and realized as rasas under proper conditions. The suggestion of the bhavas of the characters in a poem or drama by the Vibhavas and Anubhavas. Understanding things in poetry and drama in a universal way and not as personal or somebody else's emotions. Number 4, the awakening thereby of the corresponding dormant Sthayibhavas of the Sahrdaya. The usefulness of Abhinaya and such other devices in weaning the Sahridaya's mind from destruction and of the Vibhavas and the rest in the awakening of Sahridaya's Sthayibhav. The Sahridaya's relish of the awakened Sthayibhavas as rasas. And last, the relish or enjoyment is a particular mental perception. Now, Abhinavagupta also talks about certain obstacles that may come in the realization of the rasas, and he lists them down very meticulously. The first obstacle recognized by Abhinavagupta is the absence of propriety or lack of reasonableness of things presented, or what can be called the want of realism. If a spectator or a reader questions the probability of an occurrence of events in the work of art, then his concentration is disturbed and the awakening of the Sthayibhav are interfered and realization of rasa is hindered. So what he means is that if a person, when he is watching a particular play or reading a poem, he should not be questioning whether this can actually happen. If he is questioning that, in that case, his Sthayibhavas will not be aroused and he will not be able to experience the true rasa. Abhinavagupta suggests that the would-be poet should take theme from the established epics so that even when he depicts the extraordinary, the scenes are not doubted on the grounds of probability. So you see, Abhinavagupta has spoken about the obstacles and also has given solutions to them. For this particular obstacle, he talks of bringing the stories or the plots from the epics. The next obstacle consists in understanding what goes on before the spectator and the bhavas suggested and revealed by it as relating either to himself or to another or to both. In this case, the realization of the rasa is interfered with. If the spectator refers what he sees to himself, he becomes a party to the transaction. But if he refers to others, then he becomes indifferent. This obstacle can be removed by use of device which idealizes things like costumes, music, or devices that Bharat calls Natya Dharmi. The third obstacle that Abhinavagupta talks about is that of the presence of a private grief or joy which he calls Hridaya Granthi. These private emotions will not allow the spectator or reader to concentrate on the work of art, thereby hindering the realization of rasa. The mind needs to be cleared, and that can be affected by music and other theatrical arrangements. The fourth obstacle is the absence of adequate means for a clear and immediate realization of the bhavas by the spectator. The fifth obstacle is the lack of clearness of perception. The only way in which the fourth and the fifth obstacle can be dealt with is immediate realization of bhav through visualizing things like actions, gesticulations, etc. Abhinavagupta then lays stress on the proper adjustment of emphasis by poets and dramatists. He says, let not the poet or dramatist mistake the means for the end. He should realize that the awakening of the spectator's native mental impression is the end of his endeavors and that his causes, that is, vaibhavas, and circumstances anubhavs and vyabhichari bhavs, the means he employs to that end. Their function begins and ends with suggestions of the Sthayibhavas. By themselves, they are nothing. Realizing that, let him not bring what are mere means into prominence and keep the end, the Sthayibhav, in the background. If he did, his work would suffer from the defects of apradhanata, and his spectators will not be able to enjoy rasa. Lastly, the poet or the dramatist should not mislead the reader or the spectator. He should let his readers know what is the emotion that a suggested anubhava, a presented vibhava, or a suggested vyabhichari bhava is supposed to evoke. Next, we come to the concept of guna and riti in Abhinavagupta, and we'll talk about it in relation to how the Dhwani school looked at it. All the writers who preceded the Dhwani theorists, including the Alamkara school theorists, regarded guna and riti as an external embellishment of poetry attained by means of certain standard excellence. Bharata also dealt with the concept of guna and recognized it so far as it constituted the anubhav which helps the realization of rasa in drama. The Dhwani theorists looked at poetry from a different point of view. They considered rasa dhwani to be the most important feature in poetry, and all other poetical elements are considered subordinate by them. The gunas, alamkaras and doshas is judged by them not on their own account but in terms of the part they play towards the realization of rasa. According to the Dhwani school, rasa is a process that cannot be clearly discerned because it is realized simultaneously with the denoted sense. When rasa occupies a central position, rendering the vachyartha subordinate to itself, it is a case of dhwani, but when the vachyartha occupies the principal position and the rasa, bhava, etc. stands subordinate to it, then rasa, bhav do not constitute a case of dhwani but of alamkaras. Therefore, dhwani is the class of poetry where the expressed sense is subordinate to the suggested sense. Guna, for the scholars of the Dhwani school, concerns directly to the inner nature of poetry, whereas for the alamkaras constitute the external factors. Alamkara school is actually talking about the external embellishments of poetry. Therefore, it is quite of very different from the Dhwani school, which is talking about the inner essence. Gunas belong to and are the properties of rasa. The alamkaras are related to shabda and artha. But alamkaras are also recognized by the dhwanikaras to the extent to which they play a part towards the ultimate realization of rasadhwani. Alamkaras are undoubtedly the external ornaments which constitute the words and the sense, but they have a direct relationship with the underlying sentiment of a poem, which is explained by Abhinavagupta. He says that the real cause is the dhanyatma, that is the rasadhwani, which the poetic figure ultimately decorates. What he means to say is that although the ornaments are worn by an individual on the body, yet it is the soul of that individual that gets glorified. It is because of this that a dead body with ornaments do not shine, because the soul is non-existent. The Dhwanikaras mentions and characterizes only three gunas, namely ojas or energy, prasada or lucidity, and madhurya or the sweetness, instead of the usual 10 of Bharata, Dandin and Vamana. These three gunas have been classified on the basis of the particular mental conditions involved in the perception of rasa. Abhinavagupta's teachings tell us that the mental condition itself is primarily the guna. Thus, the gunas, ojas, prasada and madhurya exist respectively in the form of the three mental conditions, dipti, which is the expansion, vyapakta, which is the pervasion, and adrata or druti, which means melting. which are evoked only in the process of the realization of the rasa, and so the guna has an inseparable association with that element. The question of guna does not arise when there is no rasa. Hence, rasa is the ultimate cause of which the guna is produced as an effect. There is a mutual relationship between the guna and the rasa. It is true that the gunas come into existence on account of the rasa. It is equally true that the guna constitutes a part and parcel in the actual realization of the rasa. In that case, the theorists deal with the question from two different points of view. Number one, a single guna belongs to different rasas, and number two, different gunas belong to a single rasa. Thus, madhurya or sweetness is present generally in the Sringara rasa, but it is also present in the Vipralambha Sringara and the Karuna. Similarly, ojas or energy which involves an expansion of the mind resides generally in the Rudra rasa, but Abhinavagupta remarks that it may also be present in the Vira and Adbhuta rasa. Prasada is a guna which is common to all the rasas. Hasya, Bhayanak, Bibhatsa, Shanta contains more than one guna. Dhwanikara's remark that ritis were introduced by the theorists who only dimly understood the true significance of poetry. This means that when Raswadhani is accepted as the all-important element of poetry, there is no need of conceiving separate poetic element as riti, which produces no more than sensuous delight. Abhinavagupta distinctly remarks that the ritis are made to resolve into gunas, and since the gunas are subordinate to rasa, the ritis merge their identities in guna and ultimately in rasa. Therefore, as you can understand, Abhinavagupta do not deal much with the concept of riti because it ultimately merges into guna and therefore into rasa. The next point that we are going to talk about is how is Abhinavagupta different from all the scholars that preceded him. He is significantly different from the scholars who preceded him, so much so that he also went ahead and detected the flaws in their arguments, corrected them and formulated his own theory of it, which helped the subsequent generations to understand Bharat's Natya Shastra. Here we will see the differences he had with the scholars like Bhattanayaka and Sri Shankuka. We'll begin with Bhattanayaka. He was of the opinion that the true rasa is already existing in the work of Bharata. It is already correctly pointed out by him. There is no more necessity of any addition. What he tried to do in his work is to expound the sage's explanation clearly. He was the first one to explain the spectator's pleasure in a play or reader's in a poem as a phenomenon going on within him and resulting out of elements present within him. So, as you can see, he is one of the first critics who gave importance to the figure of the reader and the spectator and said that rasa is something that happens within him. So, in this module, we have discussed about Abhinavagupta and his magnum opus Abhinavabharati and what the importance of it in the Indian poetics. We have seen how he is one of the earliest critics who have placed the reader and the spectator at the center of aesthetic experience, giving more importance to the figure of the Sahrdaya than the poet himself. He says that the rasa is something that happens within the mind of the spectator, thereby giving him the highest position. We have also spoken about the ninth rasa or the Shanta rasa that Abhinavagupta brings in Indian poetics and which is followed by all the subsequent poeticians after him. So I hope it was understandable and you had enjoyed this module. Thank you.